Hi everyone, welcome to our next episode of Free Your Mind. Today we are joined with Kuljit. Kuljit is a gay man of Sikh heritage. He runs a monthly peer support group for LGBTQ plus Punjabi people as part of the Open Mind project. He has lived experiences of the stigma and shame that people face within the community, and I'll let him carry on the introduction for himself.
Yeah, so my name's Kuljit. I set up the Open Minds group with two other organizations, Taraqi and Sarbat, about 2 and a bit years ago. So it started off as a London-based peer support group. So we had a group once a month. And then when the pandemic hit, we were just about to launch in Birmingham. We had our first meeting there, but then the pandemic happened and luckily we were able to go online. And it's been pretty amazing because we now have kind of international reach. So we're able to get our message out across the world.
That's great. Thank you, Kuljit. So in terms of the work that you do at the Open Minds project, obviously you said we run a monthly peer support group, as you mentioned. How do you feel as though, so obviously we're talking about mental health, so how do you feel as though people come across and say that they've been affected by their mental health with this sort of subject, and what are the experiences that you've been shared with?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? I think so. There's lots of different ways of thinking about it, but I think the one given is that none of us comes out of our childhood and our teenage years completely fine. And I think that it's really, really important that everyone spends some time, if they can, kind of unpicking things, ironing things out. The difficulty is that if you're kind of like an other in a community, so a group that other people don't talk about, or that you feel that is shamed, or that there's stigma or taboo around it, then that kind of smoothing out of your identity can go wrong really early. So I think talking about from my own perspective, so I knew I was different when I was growing up. I couldn't put a word to it. I knew at school, especially secondary school, sort of after puberty, that something was different. But the funny thing is that in my version of Punjabi kind of upbringing, nobody talked about it. So it was only when I was like literally, the other end of my teenage years that I started to become aware that maybe this part of my sexuality could be the thing why I felt kind of disconnected from everything. And I think so the impact on my mental health was just feeling strange for so many years, not having any words to describe it, and then not really having any spaces to be myself or explore that. And then over time, that can do something really, it can become toxic to your sense of self. And for some people, that pushes them into, I guess, issues with their self-esteem, and that can go into depression, anxiety. Some people turn to substances to help them feel better. So yeah, it has that kind of disconnection with your own community, not being able to talk about who you are, not being able to talk about who you love and who you're attracted to, and being made to feel bad about it. That can have a really bad effect on our sense of selves if it goes on for too long. And I've definitely felt that in my own life, but I've definitely also seen that in the work that I do with these groups.
Thank you, Kuljit. So personally, I'm also part of the LGBTQ plus community. I identify as a lesbian. And the reason why I wanted to speak to you today, because I think, I've also got those experiences of being part of the Asian community and of that community as well. So for me personally, I really resonate with what you're saying there in terms of having a double lifestyle. So yeah. I think that's where you struggle at first, because you have two separate lives where you have to be one person here and one person there. Yeah. And I think, from what you've said, it obviously seems that that's a sort of common theme that runs through the people within the same situation. It's just like having those two lifestyles, and really you just want to sort of marry them together and get, be one person, but you have to sort of be two separate people. And yeah. I think, that's definitely something that I felt has affected my mental health personally.
Yeah.
Would you say that's something that comes up quite regularly?
Yeah, and I just want to say thank you for even just showing yourself in that way in this kind of forum, because the sad shame of things is that there are so many of us out there some of us who identify specifically, you know, as lesbian or gay, and then some of us who are just have a different kind of sexuality or a different kind of way of being, from their gender perspective or something else. And I think, you know, just other people seeing us out in the world, I've been told that, I don't know if you've been told that, but it just makes people feel better. They kind of see themselves reflected out in the world, because for a lot of people, so I'm thinking of people who maybe still live with their parents or still have to kind of mix in family settings where people know about their identity, but they can't talk about it, either because they don't want to or because they just don't have the practice to talk about it. It can feel like you're an invisible person walking around through the world.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I think,
No.
yeah, I think with any sort of situation, so I think the ladies will also be able to agree with this. Like it's like within sport, females within sport,
Yeah.
visibility is key. You
Yeah.
know, we've got people within the industry, and unless you can see it, you can't be it. And you know, we've got people that are sort of trailblazers, Manisha being one and Vina being one herself as well. You know, and those things are really important, that we're online and we're showing people that, you know, we're here. And I
Yes.
think, you know, I think it's really important that we are visible. So yeah, for me, it's really important.
100%, 100%. And that was there was a really big early experience when I started doing this group. The first group that I did, two people came up to me afterwards and they said, do you know what? Hearing you talk about your life and the fact that it got better for you has given us hope. And I thought, oh my God, that's amazing. You know, I'm just talking about what happened to me. And just by the act of, like you said, you know, seeing it is believing it. So when people can see that people can push against, you know, the barriers, or the barriers they think they are there, then they can imagine themselves there. And, you know, we kind of clear a path, a little bit, a few more steps. You know, and that's the thing I have to keep reminding myself that, you know, especially in this country, my work can only happen because of all the people that have come before me. And I recognize that I'm just one little bit, tiny little bit in a chain of, you know, trying to improve the lives of people like us out in the world. And sometimes we'll have some successes and sometimes we'll have some flops. But yeah, that's kind of that's kind of what I'm trying to do with this. I'm trying to just push our space out a little bit more into the world, and hopefully it will spill over into the communities that need to hear it.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's really important that you know, there's not many groups that do this. That what you do online, I think it's really good. So yeah, well done for doing it, because honestly, it's really amazing the work that you're doing. Manisha, Vina, do you have any questions for Kuljit?
Yes, I do. Just going back to you know, you said that you started off the group with two other people, and you initially started off in London, and then just before lockdown, you went into Birmingham. Just can you just explain like a little bit more in terms of what it is that you guys do in the support groups? You know, and who I suppose you kind of already touched on it a little bit. Who's it for as well? Because I'm sure there's other people who may be able to kind of relate and may want to reach out to you as well. So yeah, if you just talk about a little bit more in terms of what it is that you guys are doing within the support groups.
Yeah, so the way I designed it is I used what is it called, co-production kind of idea. So the idea, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's kind of trying to get the people who might want to use the group, trying to get them to tell me what they wanted. Because there's no point me designing a group around my needs when it's other people that need to use it. So the first group we did was a kind of like a bit like a focus group. I was like, well, so this is how much time we have. What do you want? And they said, oh, you know, we want a monthly group where we can talk about issues. And so then I had to go away and design it. My background is in mental health, in medicine, and what I didn't want to do is bring a problems-based kind of lens to the group. So the way I kind of put it together is we have a topic, and the topic is there to for lots of different reasons, but the main ones are to bring out something that's important to us and give it words and make it important. So for example, we might talk about language and how language might be a barrier, but it also gives people something to focus on when they're in the group. So if they're nervous or stressed, they've got something to talk about. Almost always the stories end up going to the same places, which is about family acceptance, about coming out, about how to be your authentic self. So that's kind of how the group always kind of runs the same format. We do now in the online world, our format is we kind of do small group work to start off with, and then big group discussion. And my role there is just to try and help the conversation flow, help people feel like the space is safe enough for them to talk. And I'm almost always bowled over by the amount that people share and the vulnerability that they feel comfortable putting out there. Every single group we've had new people join. So I always think that some people don't come to every group, and some people, we always have new people, and that still surprises me. So the group, so the Open Minds thing, because it fell out of Cyber Sikh, so that was the Sikh Punjabi or Sikh LGBT group, and Taraqi, which is about Punjabi mental health, because it fell out of them, that's where the Punjabi kind of connection flowed out of. In saying that, we've had people of other South Asian heritages join us, and it's not an exclusive group in that way. The reason we kind of put the Punjabi bit there is to say that that's kind of my area of expertise a little bit. But you know what, there's so many commonalities across lots of South Asian communities. So the group is kind of open to anyone who thinks they can make sense of that space.
Kuljit, I've got a question, and then Sabrina, I think maybe a similar question for you too. And it was when you were talking about, and you used the phrase of like you felt early on in your life something was different. And I'm just wondering, I don't know if it would be helpful to whoever's going to be listening in, when in the period of them going through their lives, because there's not an age on it, you know, it can happen, say it can happen, but your feelings will evolve, and your being will evolve. And I just wondered, what did that for you, what did that look like when you said that you already were aware that something was different, but what was that?
You know, the funny thing is so in some ways I would describe myself as quite self-aware, and you know, I've thought a lot about myself over the years, and I've done a lot of self-help, and I've had therapy for myself, which has been really amazing, and I recommend it for everyone. When I was going from that teenage to adult phase, I didn't know what my sexuality was, and it's just a funny thing about how the mind works, because I probably at some level definitely knew I was attracted to men, but it was so separate from my sense of self, which at that time, so growing up, I wore a turban, I had long hair, I went to university away from home, and there was something very protected about my upbringing in terms of, I don't know if it resonates with yourselves, but I think if you had an upbringing which has been very cultured outside of white British culture or English culture, then sometimes I didn't know that much about the world. So I didn't really know about gay people. I didn't really know about what that was. And it was somebody that had said it to me, almost casually in a conversation. And all of a sudden things clicked. And I was like, oh my God, that is what happened. You know, that is why I was always, for me, my version of being was that I've always been more comfortable around women. My best friends at school were women. I've always been drawn to a mix of men's things and women's things, probably mainly people would say women's things. And in my mind, I could never see the difference. So I was that child that was always confused about why the environment, people around me were saying, oh, you shouldn't be sewing, you shouldn't be, knitting, you shouldn't be cooking, you should be out playing sports and stuff. That kind of realization happened for me around about 19, 20. And then when I had my first relationship, I remember saying to someone, one of my friends, and this sounds cheesy, but this is exactly how it felt. It felt like a flower that had blossomed. There was this whole other part of myself that I had not realized. And it was in that dynamic of being in a relationship and I guess having, your first love, all that kind of stuff, that suddenly all the color came into my life. And, and I think, if my life had been different, if I hadn't been able to go to university away from where I lived, ended up with this, professional career, which has given me a lot of privilege, I could still be at home in London, possibly married with children, confused about my identity. And there's no judgment on people whose lives end up like that. But sometimes it's only a combination of like opportunities and luck and events that, if you're able to grab them at the time, you can have these options. So I don't know if that answered your question, Manisha, but that's kind of how it happened for me.
No, it did. It really did. I really like the way that you spoke about the flower, and
That's exactly how it
blossoming.
felt.
That's really nice.
It's a very gay image, but you know what? That is internally, that's how it felt. I thought, yeah, suddenly everything just kind of came to life.
Yeah, no, thank you, Sabrina. What about you? If you're happy to share.
Yeah, no, definitely. For me, do you know what? It's actually quite funny. It's quite, when Kuljit was speaking, then it's sort of, again, some things were similar, because I think naturally as well, as I grew up again in the Asian culture, you're not exposed to it at all, really. So when I think, even when I was growing up, went to sort of college, I tend to have Asian group of friends. I went to university with an Asian group of friends, same group of friends, and all my friends had boyfriends. So it was just, what I did as well. I had a boyfriend. And then I came back from university, and then for me, where I actually sort of learnt who I was through football, because within the female game, there's a big sort of lesbian community. So I think me joining back into football when I finished university, I then became part of the football community, went on social events with them, and then I started to realize who I was then. So it took me again till I was in my 20s. I'm now 30, and now I'm now comfortable to be able to say it, out loud. But it's taken me that long to say that. So I think, again, without me having that exposure to that sort of the community, the LGBTQ plus community, I don't think I would have been in this position either, because I could have easily just, again, gone down the same route. If I hadn't decided to play football when I'd come back from university, I could be now as well married to a man. So it's amazing how things happen. But I think, yeah, it's sometimes like Kuljit said, it is a bit of luck and how things happen and how things unfold. But I think that's, for me, I think it's important to explore sort of different communities and be open to things. And I think, because otherwise sometimes you just do end up being a little bit sort of, stuck in in a narrow sort of direction in life, and you don't really get to explore who you are. So I think that's how it happened for me.
No, great. Thanks.
No, that's fine.
Just Kuljit, you spoke about your journey and how you became aware of who you are. Just in regards to your mental health state just before, and then I know you kind of described after, once you were aware, but what was it like just before, and growing up during that period, I guess, as well?
Do you know what? I could say now that it was fine, but do you know what? Life has been hard. And it's easy. It's some days I forget how much of a journey it's been. But other days, maybe less days, I do think, you know what? If I imagine my life as walking up a mountain, occasionally I look back behind me and think, you know what? It's pretty steep where I started off. And there was definitely points on there where I thought, you know what, this is just too hard. And again, I think I was thinking about what you were saying, Sabrina, that idea of finding your community. Because I think when you find a place where people just accept you for what you are, again, it's another kind of blossoming, it's another kind of opening. You kind of that realization that you are not the only one who has been going through that struggle can really help with the healing. And that's been one of the surprises about running this group, that my mental health has been so much better by sharing spaces with other people who don't just see me for my skin color or my gender, and recognize that, you know, that idea that none of us is just one thing. And I think that the problem still that I have in terms of my, so you know, I like to think myself as having dual heritage, you know, the Punjabi bit and then the English bit. The problem with my Punjabi bit is that because it's still so closely tied to social expectations, that actually my mental health gets worse if I'm in that environment too much, because it's the opposite of that thing of being seen for what you are. It's you going into an environment where you feel the pressure to be seen as something that other people want you to be, or to be seen as to only perform in a certain way in those kind of public spaces. So I guess my mental health has been up and down, and I think there are still days where I kind of think, you know, this is hard work, but I'm in such a different place compared to when I was in my 20s or even my early 30s. I think what I'm realizing is that this is just an ongoing thing, that, you know, the journey of life is like this. You know, everyone has up days and down days. And the less important that my sexual identity becomes in my relationships with the world, the more I can just see I'm like everyone else. You know, everyone has their struggles. And that's the other bit about this thing about giving it a voice and seeing in other people. I think sometimes it helps you realize that, you know what, none of us is completely 100% okay all of the time. Some of us just start off with a heavier load to carry. So yeah, so I think, I don't know if that answered your question, Veena, but I think, yeah, it's very much a journey. I hope I'm kind of on the up, but I suspect there will be some days still where, you know, things will kind of get on top of me a little bit.
No, you did answer it, and I suppose it's just following on from what you said. If you know if there are other people, which I'm sure there are plenty, especially within the South Asian community and probably even other communities as well. What kind of advice would you give to them if they're going through something similar, or, you know, struggling with their identity and just struggling within their own communities as well?
Do you know what? One of the biggest things I learned over the last couple of years is being kind to yourself. Now, it sounds really, really cheesy, but you know what? I don't think that my upbringing really taught me how to look after myself in that way. And I think that the expectations that I had in terms of how I should behave, what I should be achieving, what success looks like, they're so high that I don't know anyone that's really achieved them in that way. And I think, so one thing I had to learn is to be some self-compassion, and to be nice to myself, especially on the days where I don't feel like I want to be. So on the days where I feel like I need to beat myself up about something, that's where I have to do the, you know, practice the kindness. And I would say to anyone out there who is thinking that they're different, that there's something wrong with how they are, I think that those kind of thoughts are never helpful. Guilt is not a good emotion. It doesn't really get us anywhere. Shame is unhelpful. We don't live in that kind of time where we were all living in one village and, you know, they helped us, you know, make our behavior, you know, that it stopped us stealing, all that kind of stuff. Shame and guilt that we've taken in from our childhood, either from what people have said or what we've seen, is unhelpful as adults. And I think if you know that you feel like that, then just be kind to yourself, reach out. If you can afford therapy, you can get therapy, then get that. And just commit yourself to learning more about yourself. And yeah, bit by bit, if you just take one step forward, then, you know, a year down the line, you will be that much further than where you were at the beginning. So I think if it's really, really hard, just concentrate on the right now, moving a little bit forward with the occasional step back, and find your community. That's the other thing. And I think that's what Sabrina was saying. I mean, for me as well, such a powerful thing. There are lots of us out there.
Kuljit, from me, you know, the word guilt came up then, and I think that's something that, again, I feel as though is something that naturally comes as part of being part of the community, is is you naturally feel guilty. And I think, you know, even if you're sort of 10, 20 years down the line of this journey, I think it's very easy to sort of still feel, oh my God, what am I doing? What am I doing to my community?
Yeah.
And I think, how do you sort of get away from that? Because I think, again, for somebody who's sort of maybe not come out yet, or who's still, you know, contemplating who they are as a person, how do they get to the point where they think, you know what, you know, I do still feel slight bits of guilt, but I'm not really, you know, I am sort of thinking about myself a little bit more, because I think the guilt is just one thing that sort of, even now, like I've come to the other side of, I've actually come out as a gay person, but, you know, it's still something that I sort of struggle with day to day. So, you know, what's the journey like with that?
Oh, that's a really, really tricky one. And yeah, I think this, for me, probably has come back to practice. It's really my understanding of the way we develop these kinds of feelings, guilt and shame, is often they're from not necessarily what people have said. My parents never said to me I should feel bad about my sexual identity. But what I learned from my environment is that the only way you're happy is if you're married with children. That's, you know, so we celebrated weddings, we celebrated birth of children, and we cried at funerals. That was kind of it. That's like the rough, you know, that's where our emotions went. And so when you get to that stage in your 20s and you're like, so I'm not married, I don't have children, I'm unlikely to have children unless I, you know, make an extra effort to follow that through. And that kind of shame and guilt about not having achieved is very real. The hard thing, I think, when you're going from teenage to adult is that your brain's still developing, and it's quite hard sometimes to get a sense of how you compare to other people. And what I mean by that is, when I think about my family members who are married with children, they feel guilty about other stuff. They have shame about other things. And again, that idea of normalizing guilt in some ways, as I think our cultures, sometimes it's like a natural part of the culture. It's an old part. It's a part that needs to go, but it is very much, a lot of people feel it. So for example, if you're a woman, you're married and you don't have children yet, you know, the pressure is to have children. You know, why aren't you having children? You're married now. And you're like, well, I've just got married. And they're like, oh, no, we want a grandchild. We want a grandchild. And, you know, and if you can't conceive, or if you don't want to conceive, or if your career is important, or, you know, all those kinds of things, they bring up other kinds of guilt and shame. So again, I think it's about this practice of first being able to recognize when it's happening, because sometimes we don't realize the things that are making us feel bad are those voices in our head that are saying, you should feel bad about this. Look at your parents, look how they're suffering. I think you have to realize that they're also adults, and working to a kind of more adult way of being is sometimes disappointing our parents. You know, there's this idea in psychology that you can't really ever become a full kind of adult unless you rebel a little bit. But we're not really encouraged to rebel in our kind of, I'm talking about my own upbringing. I think we're kind of encouraged to behave. When you start rebelling a little bit, often things are still okay. And sometimes you can let go of some of that guilt. Sometimes you can be a bit more human. So that's a rambling answer. I guess I honestly, the guilt thing is really hard, but I'd go back to the idea of, you know, being kind to yourself if you feel it, recognizing that it's not a real thing. So this is where, for me, mindfulness and stuff is really, really handy. So you can start to pull out a little distance between what you're feeling and how you think about yourself. And there's this idea of stories as well. So we make meaning in our life. We write our own little stories, and other people sometimes write stories for us. You really have to try hard not to write guilt and shame into your own story, even if other people want to write in for you. So there's something about being proud of who you are, just for who you are. And if you're not, you know, if you're a good person, you're not harming anyone, then again, it's that kind of just grow. I think of it like little plants and flowers again, you know, seeds. If you plant that little seed inside of you, that one day will be proud of who you are. Guilt and shame is toxic to that seed. So if you feel it, you've got to get rid of it, or just ignore it, let it go. with practice, that seed of pride will get bigger and bigger and fill you up. And you might still, I do still sometimes feel guilty, a little bit of shame about not having children. But then actually my whole life and my mind is full of other things. And the guilt is kind of very, very small and it goes away. So again, yeah, that's a bit of a rambling answer, but I think I'm not 100% sure on, I think outside of therapy, which is super, super good for guilt. And, you know, there's the kind of CBT therapy, which is a bit more kind of recognizing your thoughts. And then there's the kind of like long therapy where you talk to someone. Those are really, really good ways of undoing some of those like programming things that happen in our brain. But for not everyone will like that approach. So you got to find what works for you.
Kuljit, can I ask, when or have your parents accepted it now?
So I live in this house with my partner. We've been together we were trying to work it out yesterday. I think it's 16 years. So we met when I was, what, 24, something like that. And my parents are coming to stay with us tomorrow. So we're going to have a fun time. When I came out to them, which was in, I think it was what, 25, 26. So it was not long before I'd actually say it would have been about 24, 23. After, not long before I met my partner. It probably still is one of the worst things I've ever done in my whole life. I don't know about you, Sabrina. I don't know how it was for you, but you know, it's only recently, it was so traumatic. It was kind of like, it was like seared into my mind, you know, the kind of, I could, and it is like trauma because I could, you know, I could almost put myself in that position again, remember what it smelled like, where everyone was sitting, you know, it went straight into the fear part of my brain. And I told them, but I couldn't tell them. So in the end, they had to guess, which was even worse. It took probably a good, it took years actually for them to see it, understand it. And then it took more years for them to integrate it into their like vision of us, or me, my future. But yeah, Sabrina, I don't know with you whether, you know, that kind of, yeah, it was horrible.
Yeah, I think for me, very similar. It was very hard, very hard. I think that even saying the words "I am gay," because you know what, those words, like, it takes you a long time to admit it to yourself.
Yeah.
To actually say those words out to yourself, to say it to somebody else is even another barrier.
Yeah.
So I think those words, to even say them out of your mouth, sometimes you think, I don't even know how to say them. Like, you know, so it sounds so simple, but it's like, you know, it's getting to the point where you can actually say those words physically to yourself and then getting to say them to somebody else. And then, you know, being able to say it to the wider community. I think it's all different stages. So for me, yeah, it was very traumatic. You know, looking back, it's a very, you know, memorable moment. And I think it's never easy. For me now, I'm 4 years down the line, and it's been a journey since then.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, as a message to everyone, it does get easier.
It does, 100%. And that's the thing, even though it took them a while to accept it, I felt so much better for being myself. You know, all of that toxicity of kind of like that, I think Sabrina, you said that kind of like living two lives. You know, I didn't have to do that anymore. Also what started happening is, you know, there are lots of us around, and I think about weddings. I always think about weddings. I mean, we've had a year of no weddings. It's been good and bad. But there definitely, when I was younger, there were definitely weddings where I thought there are other queer people here. Now, when I look back on it, I think there were other people there. And again, some of them might have gone on to lead, like, you know, kind of straight lives. And some of them haven't. And I wish when I was that age that there were other people. And that's my hope now, is that now, because I'm openly out, when we go to weddings, we're together. We're kind of, you know, we're people, even if they don't talk about us, they know we're there, and we are part of the community now. But we did have to fight for it a little bit. I remember having a row with my parents about being in, you know, my other half, John, being invited to a wedding. And at that point, they're kind of like, I was like, if you don't invite him, I'm not going. And that's it. And if you don't get him invited. And, you know, that was a real big turning point for me, because I think that was the point where, you know, I was talking about that pride thing. That was where the pride thing was filling up and up and up. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to squeeze myself down just because of your worry about something which won't even happen. I mean, it's very, very rare for someone, even if someone doesn't like you at a wedding, it's very rare for them to come up and say to your face, I don't like you. You might get the looks or whatever, but you know, you can just turn away, look somewhere else. So yeah.
I think it's important as well to say, you know what, if somebody was to come up to you at a wedding and say that they didn't like you, there'd always be somebody there to sort of support you.
Yeah.
And that's important to say as well, because there's definitely people in your corner as well, even if you don't feel like it sometimes.
Yeah, 100%. And you know what, I'm so optimistic about the next generations coming, and I include you in that, Sabrina, because especially when people come to the group and so I'm going to be 40 this year, so I'm ready for my midlife crisis. And when I meet younger people, though, there are a lot of people who say, yeah, my parents are fine with it, or I'm fine with it, even if my parents aren't fine with it. I know that this is nothing wrong with me. This is something wrong with the situation around me. And I'm very, very confident that in another 10 years' time, things will be so much better. The people I worry about are the ones who are living much quieter lives in places where they're not really connected very much to other people. And I've seen people like that have come to the group as well. They say, you know, I don't know any other brown people. I don't know any other Punjabi LGBTQ people. And that just makes me feel lonely. And again, that's been the real amazing thing about the group. You know what, just us all sitting in the room, in the virtual room together. Even this week, we had a group this week and people were like, I didn't even know this group existed. And I felt so lonely. And just being here with you, it doesn't matter what we've been talking about, but just being with you, seeing other people that look like me or understand my experience, I now go away into my life feeling better. So yeah, it's very, very, the groups are very, very powerful in that way.
Like an awkward silence.
Yeah, well, you know what, you're never quite sure what's going on with that. I mean, yeah, I could talk about the groups for ages, and it's a shame more people can't experience them. I think in the future, what I'd like is more I'd love to run parent groups, and also to take the groups to like religious spaces and, you know, other spaces, because I genuinely believe that a lot of people are not as anti it as we feel they are, and they just need to see that, you know, I'm just as interesting and as boring as everyone else, and our relationship is as interesting and as boring as everyone else's. You know, there are other versions of like queer relationships and other kind of lifestyles, but that isn't one that I'm leading. And I think the thing I'm conscious of is that the more space we make for these kind of alternative ways of being, which are not harmful, they're just, you know, they're just variations of how people are, then the better we'll make it for other things as well. And the thing that I always think about is, and I can't really talk to this because it's not my gender, but I think about women as well. And I think about women in Punjabi cultures, and I think there's so much left to do in terms of allowing women equal space. And I think that's why there's always a real big synergy in my mind between kind of queer rights and gender rights. So, you know, the bigger picture is that if things were okay for all of us, if we could all, you know, if you could be the straight guy who could wear a lenga to a wedding and nobody kind of be like, you know, this is weird. And the woman who could wear trousers and a suit to a wedding and no one would say, you know, this is weird. That's the kind of, we may never get to that point, but I think that the kind of LGBTQ plus people are some of the people who are pushing those boundaries and allowing those other things to happen.
Yeah, Kuljit. I think for me, I think like I said earlier, I think the fact that we've got platforms like yourselves at the Open Minds Project, I think it's really important that, you know, we have those people there, the visibility of it. But I also I was also wondering about, you know, the difference between the men and the women, like you mentioned that earlier, so women in the community. So have you noticed any difference between the lived experiences of men and women coming out?
Yeah.
What are those?
Well, do you know what? I remember a group we ran in London about it would have been over a year ago. And it was specifically about women's spaces. And it has been really hard making bringing women into the spaces, especially initially, not so much now with the online stuff. And I remember one of the women in the group said, can we have a separate space for us? And I said, yes, that would be amazing. You know, at the moment, there's only me who's doing it, but it would be amazing to work towards it. And when we ran a specific, I tried this and didn't really work, is I tried to make it a group where the women led the session. So I think there was a woman who said she would co-chair with me, but on the day, unfortunately, she couldn't do it. But we led the session. And what I'd done, I think I put the guys sitting at the back and the women sitting at the front. And I told the guys to not say anything and just allow the women to talk. And even that was quite hard. And I remember having a conversation with a very well-meaning, but maybe not so educated in this kind of thing, guy, saying, you know, I don't really understand why women have, why things are so different for women. And I was like, and I remember saying to him, you know, like, so do you have to worry about, I know this is going to sound like, I'm not explaining this to you, is what I said to him. I said, you know, when you go out in the morning, do you have to worry about what you're wearing? And if you wear something which is too, you know, has not much fabric on it, that people might comment, and actually you could be attacked somewhere for what you're wearing. And he's like, oh no, I didn't realize. And you know, the funny thing about the LGBTQ community is that it has just the same amount of prejudices as everywhere else does. So the other one is race as well. There's huge amounts of racism within and colorism within the communities. There's just less of us. So I think that women have, in my experience in these groups, women, definitely in the face-to-face groups, women have struggled to have their voices heard. And I think some of that is coming from their experiences in the world. And some of it, maybe we could do things better. Women talk about the thing of being maybe a little bit more invisible with their sexualities in their communities. And some women also talk about the fact that sometimes that's a bonus. So for some women, that they can be living lives where they can be with other women, but it not be thought of as, you know, they can be thought of as two friends rather than, you know, being in a relationship. Whereas I think for men, it can sometimes be a bit more tricky. If you're two guys out doing things together, it can be a bit harder. But so yeah, I think the lived experience for women is very different. I think it's often because of the cultural expectations women have on them about families and what to do with careers and how they should look, all that kind of stuff. And again, we're so far away from having good enough discussions about those things, even for just straight women in Punjabi cultures. Yeah.
It's interesting you say that, because I guess from my experience, I always assumed that it'd be harder for a man. Because I don't know why, but I always felt as though, for example, my brother, if my brother was gay and he wanted to come out, I felt as though if he was to, it'd be a little bit harder for him. I don't know, maybe that's something that, I don't know, I've just sort of come up with, but I think for me, I feel as though I don't know why that's my feelings. I feel as though for me as a woman, it's slightly easier as a male. I don't know if they get a bit of a harder time with it. I don't know why I've thought that, but it's interesting that you say that maybe women find it a little bit more difficult in the groups that you've had.
Yeah, I think the difficulties are more in terms of like even getting the rest of us to understand what their issues might be. I think that's the challenge, because I think everything is very much still through so even like sex, right? Thinking about sex and sexuality, a lot of gay culture, when you talk about sex, is through men's eyes. So the idea that women have a sex life, again, in traditional cultures, is very, very not talked about. And then some of that magnifies and comes out into those other spaces. So when we're talking about relationships, we're often talking about men's relationships. We're talking about hookup culture. We're often talking about men's versions of hookup culture. So, you know, I know about things like Grindr, like vaguely, but I don't know what lesbian women use. Do they also use, you know, like, do they even use apps or what?
I don't know. I'm not on the apps myself, so I wouldn't know either.
The thing is, so some of the complications come also from wider gay culture. So I think gay men have always had a slightly difficult relationship with lesbian women, even in the kind of gay rights movements. I think lesbian women often did a lot for to move things forward, but they're not really necessarily recognized in the same way. So I guess, you know, the thing about patriarchy, it has the same reach into LGBTQ plus spaces, and I think maybe that is one of the difficulties, I think, in terms of being a man, that you have to break that idea of what masculinity is and what a man should be, and that can be quite hard, because what are you as a man if you're not that? But you know, that opens up the whole discussion about male mental health and how that works. But yeah, and I think that the thing to say in all of this is, there are no absolutes in all of this, and we've all got slightly different versions of experience. And even like Punjabi culture, you know, Punjabi cultures is what I say about now, because my version of Punjabi culture is my parents went from Punjab to East Africa, and then they came to the UK. So they weren't even born in Punjab, and they can speak Swahili as well as Punjabi. So, you know, their version of Punjabi is very different from someone who came straight from Punjab. The problem is when you come here, there's a risk that we all just become flattened into the same thing. And it's similar with all, so the hard thing for my groups is that we'll have to tell everyone we're here for a common thing, but actually we're all just as different from each other as we are similar. So that's the hard bit. The hard bit is giving people the space. We don't want to, again, squeeze them into a kind of, you're only gay and Punjabi here, we can only talk about gay and Punjabi things. What I say is that's the reason you're here, but actually the rest of the space we can talk about whatever you want.
Yeah, definitely. I think, you know, what would you say if you could give, say, a piece of advice, you know, to round it up, to somebody who, as we said earlier, isn't yet, you know, willing to sort of come out and step out and be who they are? What would that one piece of advice be?
Oh, I don't know. I think if I thought about myself when I was younger, the advice I would have liked someone to say is, so firstly, find your community. There will be people out there who will be your tribe, like, you know, especially these days, you can find them. Be kind to yourself, and things will get better.
That's great. Thank you, Kuljit. I think we've really enjoyed having you today. And I think it'll be great when we share this and get it out there, because I think it's definitely important that we sort of get these topics out there. So yeah, thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you all.